to Breathe by Ashley Neese, read by Book Dragon. Introduction to Breathwork. What do yoga, meditation, and forest bathing have in common? The breath. The breath is the foundation of every mindfulness practice. It is the tool that is always with us, accessible at any time for calm, balance, and presence of mind. The amazing thing is that anybody, regardless of age, ability, location, or beliefs, can utilize breathwork to better navigate life. It just requires practice and attention. In essence, breathwork is breathing practiced with mindfulness. It's that simple. Because of its accessibility and effectiveness, breathwork is quickly on the rise in the wellness field. Over the last decade, it has become an increasingly popular method of natural healing for anxiety, depression, PTSD, trauma, and chronic physical pain. It is also a practical tool for amplifying creativity, tapping into inner wisdom, and expanding consciousness. With the science-backed breath labs set up at Stanford University and apps like Spire that detect your respiration rate throughout the day, it's clear that breathwork is reaching far beyond yoga and meditation, carving out its own space in the world. Breathing is easy to take for granted because it's automatic. It's also easy to write off breathwork and think, it's too simple. It won't work for me. Simple as it is, adopting a breath practice helps you cultivate greater health in all aspects of your life, from relationships to work to stress to grief. I came to the breath the way many of us do, through meditation and yoga. I started meditating out of necessity in a drug rehab when I was 21. At the time, I was involved in a 12-step program and had a sponsor who encouraged me to learn to meditate. I will never forget the intense challenge of those early days, sitting on my couch and trying to quiet my mind. It was excruciating, and I quickly started seeking meditation teachers and practices to help me find peace in the midst of the chaos of early recovery. In those tender days and months of learning how to let myself feel without numbing through drugs and alcohol, I began to learn about my breath. One of my favorite breath-focused meditation practices was simply to count 1, 2, 3, 4 on the inhale and 1 and 4, 3, 2, 1 on the exhale. This was the only thing that helped my mind settle, even if for only a few seconds. And it was in those seconds that I eventually started the very lengthy process of learning how to regulate my emotions without the need for substances. When I got out of rehab, I went back to college to study printmaking. And after graduating, I moved to San Francisco to pursue an MFA in socially engaged art. After graduate school, I began teaching art and traveling for exhibitions and lectures. While living as an artist, I kept up my breathing and meditation practices, albeit in a very imperfect way. I would have months of rigorous practice followed by months of no practice at all. It took me years to learn to be consistent despite the suggestions from my teachers and nearly every book I read on meditation. In my late 20s, I began to develop a deeper practice of simply breathing and being with myself. And that's when my life and spiritual development accelerated in tremendous ways. During those intense years of personal discovery and study, I found myself drawn to different schools of Buddhism and various branches of Hatha yoga, and I eventually found my way into studying energy medicine, medical intuition, neuroscience, and somatic psychotherapy. While living in Berlin on a grant from the Danish Arts Council, I created a blog about how I was changing my life through meditation, yoga, and eating whole foods. I started the project as a way to process and understand my own transition. But within 6 months, I had friends asking me to coach them through their own lifestyle struggles. I realized my struggles were not unique, and the tools I was using could be made available to anyone. Before I knew it, I felt the call to move to Los Angeles and start a holistic health practice. I arrived in Los Angeles with one friend and a big dream of supporting people in their work to inhabit their bodies. At the time, I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but for the first time in what seemed like a forever, I knew where I was supposed to be. I jumped into a yoga teacher training course with one of my dearest teachers, Tony Gugliano. And after completing it, I began teaching in studios across the city. Within a year, I realized I was less interested in teaching asana, yoga postures, and more interested in teaching about the breath. What I loved about the breath was that it was more accessible than yoga poses and traditional meditation practices. It felt really modern and fresh to me, despite the fact that many breathing practices had been around for thousands of years. What I also loved about the breath was that it was a very direct way to work with my body while also working with my emotions and spirit. It was the ultimate integrative remedy. I decided to take the plunge and scale down my offerings to focus solely on the deeper aspects of breathwork after studying the breath with a few other teachers from various backgrounds. Narrowing the scope of my practice was one of the most smartest and personal and business decisions I had ever made. It allowed me to dive much deeper than I could go while juggling so many aspects of my previous holistic health practice. I also recognized that if I wanted to become an expert in this space, I would also have to devote more of my time and energy to it. The beauty of this work is that there is always more to learn, and narrowing in gave me room to expand into the depths of what is possible with the breath. As my teaching and client practice grew, I began developing my own unique breathing practices for clients, born out of their specific needs. Many of my clients didn't relate to the language or mythology around more classical breath practices. I realized that breath work as a healing technology needed a major update to make it accessible in the modern world. From getting a better night's sleep to reducing anxiety to setting boundaries, the practice in how to breathe will help you develop a consistent practice of being with yourself. Being a full-time breathwork teacher for the past several years and creating my own practices and methodology for working with the breath has given me the courage to take the next step in my growth and write this book. Truth be told, I wrote my first book in elementary school and have had an affinity for the power books have to change our lives since my days of winning summer reading contests at the local library. People often ask me why I teach breathwork and what breathwork means to me. While there are many reasons, all of which you will discover as you read the pages of this book, it really comes down to a desire to fully inhabit my body and my passion for supporting others to do the same. I spent so many years of my life disassociating, checking out, and numbing, even after I stopped drinking and using drugs. I realized that my deepest desire was to feel present within myself to feel anchored to the earth, to be able to self-regulate, and to know deeply that I had the ability to trust my inner wisdom. After years of creating safe spaces for my clients to explore their breath and bodies and all that comes with it, I want to share with you the practices that are changing our lives. This book will introduce you to the foundations of breathwork and my methodology. It outlines the scientific supported benefits, explains how the breath regulates emotions, the stress response and resilience, and presents the best way to engage in breathwork. From there, you will discover 25 breathing practices for everyday situations that are easy to integrate into modern life, including breathwork for anxiety, relaxation, energy, and more. Each practice features an introduction explaining the origin, benefits, and purpose of the breathwork, followed by step-by-step instructions and post-practice notes. Breath, the foundational tool. Breath is the foundation for many healing arts practices, including meditation, yoga, and energetic medicine. Becoming curious about your breath is the quickest way to shift your emotions, thoughts, and vibration. In this section, I share the most essential things you need to know about breathing, the anatomy of breath, and how the breath and emotions are inextricably linked. The universal breath. At a very basic level, breath is the foundation for life. A general rule of thumb is that humans can go for about 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, and 3 minutes without oxygen. Not only is our breath essential to keeping us alive, it is also the key practice for modern day wellness. It is beneficial to our overall health, resilience, and personal and collective growth. Throughout history, breath has often been associated with the concept of a life force or spirit. Interestingly, this connection is apparent in many corners of the world and across many cultures and disciplines. In Greek, the word psyche can be translated as life or breath. In Latin, the word spiritus means breath and is also where we derive the modern-day word spirit. The Sanskrit word pranayama comes from the word prana, life energy, and ayama, to extend or draw out. In classical hatha yoga, pranayama is the practice of regulating the breath through techniques for specific health benefits. There are Tai Chi breathing practices specifically designed to strengthen the diaphragm and acupuncture points in Chinese medicine to open the flow of qi or life force in the body. In some African and South American traditions, the breath is used to release spirits from the body and thus aiding in the healing of the individual and the community. In addition to the rich historical landscape of the breath, we are learning today through neuroscience research that a number of nerve cells in the brainstem connect breathing to different states of mind. This research is significant because it confirms what thinkers, healers, and mystics have known for ages. We have the power to shift our thinking by changing the way we breathe. And since it's already common knowledge that our thoughts affect our overall health, energy, and well-being, it's safe to conclude that changing our breathing can have a global effect on our entire body. A basic anatomy of breathing. Our respiratory system is responsible for taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. Adults typically breathe 12 to 20 breaths per minute, which is about 20,000 cycles every 24 hours. This rate increases with physical exertion and decreases while in a resting state. Just to give you an idea of how the body uses oxygen, about 25% of it is used in the brain, while the kidneys use 12%, and the heart just 7%. Our bodies need oxygen to sustain themselves and need to be able to expel carbon dioxide to cleanse the system. Breath is a natural detoxifier. When we think of cleansing these days, the go-to usually has something to do with the food we eat. And while that is essential for wellness, making sure we are breathing well throughout the day is an impactful way to keep our system clean and clear. The major body parts and organs that are involved with breathing are the mouth, nose, larynx, voice box, trachea, lungs, and diaphragm. When we breathe, oxygen enters the mouth and nose, and the air moves through the pharynx, throat, larynx, and trachea into the lungs. Then air is exhaled, flowing back through the same pathway. One of the reasons I encourage my clients to breathe through their nose when they are not engaged in strenuous exercise is because inhaling through the nose enhances endurance and increases our ability to focus. The nose is also a defense against bacteria and produces nitric oxide, which is a very important compound for cardiovascular, immune, and sexual health. Once the air is in the body, it flows through the trachea, windpipe, and then moves to the bronchi, two tubes that carry air into each lung. From there, it goes into the lungs, where the oxygen is exchanged for carbon dioxide. The bloodstream delivers oxygens to cells and removes waste or carbon dioxide through internal respiration. During exhalation, air passes from the lungs through the larynx, then out the nose or mouth. When I teach first-time clients or a breathwork basics class, I tend to spend most of my time on the diaphragm because it is the primary breathing muscle, and it is a part of the body that most of us aren't very familiar with. The diaphragm is a very deep muscle with an asymmetrical double-domed shape located at the base of the chest that divides the torso into thoracic and abdominal cavities or sections. Access your diaphragm. Take your hands and place each side of your torso with the fingers facing forward and your pinky fingers touching your bottom ribs. Breathe gently in and out through your nose. Feel your sides expand on the inhale and release on the exhale to get a sense of how your diaphragm is working inside your body with each breath. During normal inhalation, the diaphragm contracts and moves downward, which increases the space in your chest, giving your lungs room to expand. When you exhale, the diaphragm releases and moves upward, and your lungs return to their neutral position. Because of the deeply domed shape of the diaphragm, I often tell students to watch jellyfish videos online to get a visual sense of how the diaphragm moves in our body while we breathe. There is something quite ethereal about those sea creatures that gives a very sensory experience of how our diaphragm contracts and expands. One more thing of note about the diaphragm is that its shape is created by the organs enclosing and surrounding it, like the liver and heart. These relationships and the interconnectedness of those organs are essential to consider when working with other systems in the body. Breath and the stress response. It is impossible to explore the breath without looking at the autonomic nervous system, ANS. The ANS connects the brain to the body and is a two-way street. If you are anxious or stressed by an event in your life or from thinking about an event, the brain, via the nerves of the ANS, will most likely turn on the sympathetic part of that system. your fight or flight response. When you are in a calm or relaxed state, your ANS will turn on the parasympathetic part of the system, your rest and digest mode. Rest and digest versus fight or flight. Most of us has heard of fight or flight, but not as many have heard of rest and digest. These are two sides of the same coin when it comes to your automatic nervous system. When under stress, the sympathetic part of your system turns on, increasing the heart rate and blood pressure, preparing you to deal with the challenge ahead. When relaxed and calm, the parasympathetic part of the system is engaged. Your heart rate comes down, your blood pressure lowers, and your breathing slows. During inhalation, the heart gets stimulated to beat a little faster. During the following exhale, the heart gets a message to slow down. The overall effect is very little change in the heart rate from minute to minute. However, when you make one part of the breath cycle, either the inhale or exhale, longer than the other, and you do this for several minutes, the accumulated effect is that you will either slow down your heart rate or speed it up, depending on where you begin. When you extend your exhale by 1 to 2 counts longer than your inhale, and you practice this for a few minutes, your heart rate will slow down. This sends a feedback message to the brain saying that everything is more peaceful and calm than it was a few minutes ago. This lets the brain support this shift further by turning on the rest and digest mode of the nervous system, which goes back from the brain to the body. The amazing thing is that the lungs and heart can send feedback to the brain and essentially convince the brain that things are calm and peaceful, even when there are still stressful circumstances or anxiety-provoking thoughts circulating in the mind. This is especially important in modern life when internal and external stressors are often constant, even though we are in no physical danger. I often hear from clients that they are stressed about the never-ending stream of email in their inboxes and the feeling of having to check their phones first thing in the morning. In some people, anxiety or stress can cause a freeze response, which is typically marked by a fast and short inhale that is held until the body has to release the carbon dioxide. After our first session, they often report holding their breath while glancing over email on their phone. This type of breath response can reinforce the feeling of stress. This is one example of how our systems are becoming increasingly taxed and overloaded in our modern world, and how stress can perpetuate itself. Breathwork is an excellent practice to stop that cycle in its tracks. Anxiety and stress cannot live in the body if you consciously slow down your breathing, because they require a cycle of fast and shallow breathing. The majority of the breathing exercise in the breathwork practice section of this book are designed to strengthen your parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, to help you move easily into conscious healing as well as grounded and restful states. Over years of working with clients and teaching groups, I've found that the majority of the people I work with don't need their sympathetic systems turned on any higher. So the focus is less on getting them energized and more on how to ground and replenish their systems. For those of you who are looking for more energizing practices, I have included a couple of them for you as well. The power of the exhale. One of my main focus is with new clients is on the exhale. Since the vast majority of the people I work with have a tendency to either hold their breath, have very short exhales, or feel challenged by exhaling, I have found that this is a good place to begin to explore the breath. I also hone in on this area because, as I mentioned before, the exhale correlates with the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest mode, which is a system that usually needs support. One of the things I've seen consistently over the years is that many of the people I work with are either entirely on or entirely off, with no balance in between. This can also be a marker of trauma, which I touch on a little later in this section. They have no idea how to truly rest, and they don't have a practice of rest that is actually nourishing and restorative. For many, rest tends to look like numbing, checking out, avoiding, or suppressing. This might sound surprising, but it is much more common than most of us realize. Take a minute to contemplate the last time you felt truly relaxed, restored, or deeply replenished. If that was recently, congrats, you're on the right track. If you cannot remember the last time you felt that way, or if it was a really long time ago, do not worry. This book will serve as a guide for you to help ground your system and process what's coming up along the way and give you accessible practices to help you learn to take deeper care of yourself. A big part of the issue is that our world is moving at lightning speeds. With so many demands on our energy and time, it is no wonder most of us feel burned out and depleted at some point or another. For me, running a full-time practice, writing, being in a relationship, planning for a family, taking care of myself, and making sure to see my loved ones requires me to function at a very high level most of the time. For those of you who are also full of passion and energy for the work that you do, it can be challenging to hit the pause button and reset. I've learned the hard way over many years of trial and epic errors that working with my exhale has ultimately been incredibly rewarding, albeit very challenging at times. It has led to a deeply spiritual journey of learning how to listen to my body and move at a pace that is comfortable for it, rather than getting caught up in the speed of my mind or the world around me. With patience, time, and practice, nearly everyone I have worked with has developed a new relationship to their exhale, and it has proven time and time again to be a real turning point in people's lives. The power of the exhale lives in the invitation to slow down with the presence, which is completely different than checking out, suppressing, or numbing. The power of the exhale lives in our body's inherent wisdom that we need to hit the pause and refresh button on ourselves just as much, and I'd argue even more, as we do on all of our technology. The power of the exhale not only helps us reduce anxiety and find our ground, but also supports a wider range of resilience, which opens us up to a world of possibilities for our health and well-being. Breath and emotions. Just for fun, try holding your breath for a minute while feeling joyful. Challenging, isn't it? Breath is deeply connected to the amount of spaciousness or freedom we feel in our bodies. Without it, we feel constricted. This affects our capacity to tolerate intense and pleasant emotions and experiences. Our window of tolerance correlates to our breath, and if we breathe with ease, depth, fullness, and flow, all aspects of our life can feel more expansive. Imagine just for a moment being frustrated. As you imagine being frustrated, notice how your breath begins to shift. You might experience it being shorter, constricted, or caught in your chest. Now imagine yourself feeling grateful and noticing how your breath changes yet again. In this simple example, it is easy to see just how connected our breath and emotions are. The quality and intensity of our emotions, either positive or negative, is connected to how we breathe. If our breathing pattern tends to be on the restrictive side, that also correlates with the tendency to check out or suppress difficult emotions. Restrictive and stagnant breathing patterns are often previous attempts to cope with emotional or physical events that can go as far back as when we were in utero. On the flip side, if our breath tends to be more spacious and fluid, this relates to the openness and ease that we feel in our body with self-expression. When we are afraid to show how we feel or lack the skills to articulate what is happening for us, these feelings are consciously repressed or subconsciously suppressed. These repressed and suppressed feelings end up being stored in the body and over time manifest as chronic tension, pain, and eventually disease. The magic of learning to work with the breath is that we all have the built-in equipment we need to learn how to change our feelings, energy, and transform how they are expressed in our bodies. Before ending this subsection on breath and emotions, I have to talk about the diaphragm again, in more historic terms. The diaphragm is said to separate heaven and earth as it crosses the solar plexus, an area associated with the spleen in Chinese medicine that relates to personal power, self-esteem, and self-discipline. Given its shape, location, and function in the body, I often describe the diaphragm as a lid containing emotions and experiences that we have repressed or suppressed in the body. This is one of the main reasons some forms of brain breathwork are associated with deep emotional healing. When you start paying attention to your diaphragm and work with it through the breath, you process emotions somatically or in the body, as opposed to processing them through the cognitive mind, as is common in the majority of psychotherapy practices.